Hi everyone, John here with Fountain Pen Love, and in this video I want to go over some basic exercises that you can do to practice your doodling shapes and hopefully make your doodles more consistent and enjoyable. Now when I say doodle, I'm not talking about drawings of people or cars or buildings or anything like that. I'm talking about shapes and patterns that you can use your pens to draw for fun, for relaxation. So let's go ahead and dive in and take a look at some of these practice exercises that you can do anytime. So we're talking about practice that will get your doodles to be more consistent and get you more comfortable with them. When it comes down to it, doodles are basically just lines and circles, and so that's what we're going to practice. I have a variety of pens here. I've got a fine, I've got a medium, and I've got a broad. I want to kind of use all three to show you how they might work, how you can use them to figure out what your preference is, and really see which ones work best for which situations. So if you remember from my previous video talking about pens, inks, and paper, I do like to have something underneath when I'm doodling on a harder surface. It just makes everything feel a little bit softer. So I've got this paper underneath. Also, if this bleeds through a little bit while I'm doodling, I don't get it onto my countertop. It goes onto this paper underneath. So if you're ready, go ahead and grab a pen, a paper, and let's get started. So the first thing that I want to do is I'm going to start with some circles. Now, with these circles, it might sound pretty basic, but remember, all doodles are really just circles and lines. There's nothing really revolutionary in what I'm doing here. So what I like to do is just start with a circle. And the first thing I want you to pay attention to is, do you prefer to draw a circle clockwise or counterclockwise? So this is clockwise, counterclockwise. My preference is definitely counterclockwise. That's just the way that feels the most comfortable to me. There's no right or wrong way. So if you prefer to do it clockwise, go for it. The next thing I want you to do is go ahead and start drawing a series of circles. So you're going to draw one, draw a larger one around it, a larger one around that, a larger one around that, and we want to do 5 circles. Now the goal here is to just draw 5 circles. You're not necessarily trying to draw them perfectly. You can see I've got a nice point onto the top of this one. Sometimes they get a little closer on one side than the other. That's totally fine. Unless you're a perfectionist, this is going to work just fine for your doodles. If you are a perfectionist, you're probably going to have a hard time doodling because, at least the way I do it, I embrace a lot of imperfections, a lot of organic shapes, asymmetry. I don't necessarily like everything to be exactly perfect. So this is my style. I'm totally fine with it. So don't stress if yours don't look perfect, okay? So the next thing that I'm going to have you do is start filling in these circles. I like to leave the outer circle empty, and you'll see why in some doodles when we have overlap, if this outer circle is filled in, it's going to blend right in with the circles next to it. So I like to start with the next circle from the outside and start filling it in. And here you can already see why using a fine nib, at least for me, is not preferable. When I want to fill in spaces, which I do a lot of in my doodles, it's pretty ugly. It's pretty sloppy. It looks like I'm scribbling. It doesn't fill in very easily. So I personally don't like using fine nibs, especially when I have to fill in empty spaces, because it just doesn't look very good. So I'm going to do this again, but this time I'm going to use a medium nib. I recommend that you try different nib sizes to see which you prefer. You'll kind of get a feel for how one works better than the other for certain things and not for others. So I personally think that this medium nib is my sweet spot. I like the line size, I like how it fills in the circles, and I really just kind of feel like it's the easiest for me to doodle with. So here we've got the 5 circles filling in outside. It still takes some scribbling, but I feel like it fills in a lot better, a lot more consistently. I don't have any real leftover spots like I did on this one over here, especially if I want to take a lot more time, be a little more careful, go back through and do this. So this is one of the first exercises that I would recommend you do, is just draw some circles, fill them in. use a variety of nib sizes so you can see which one you like the best. I'm going to go ahead and do one more with a broad nib here. You'll see how much quicker it fills in the space. The one thing about a broad, in my opinion, this is actually a C, it's a platinum C, which is like a double broad. The one thing here that I think makes it a little more difficult to use is the line size is so much bigger, it's easy to run into the line next to it if you're not paying attention. So a lot, on something like this where it's just these circles, it's not too bad. It's really easy to keep everything separate, but you'll see in some doodles that I do in the future, it's your lines start to get a lot closer together and it's much harder to keep everything separate. So a broad works really well for something like this, but it doesn't always work so well for doodles. So keep that in mind. Again, you'll see which one you like the best, which one feels the best to you. I encourage you to try different nib sizes, even different inks, some that are wetter, some that are drier, to see how this whole process kind of feels. But really, this is one of the first exercises that you can do. Decide which direction you want to draw your circles, and then draw some concentric circles, filling them in as you go. And right there, you have the basis for a decent number of the doodles that I do. They all kind of have this similar theme. Now, the next thing that we want to do is draw some lines. Like I said, doodles are just circles and lines. So after we've drawn some circles, let's go ahead and draw some lines. Now, I think everyone's going to have a little bit of a different preference as far as the direction they draw their lines. So first things first, this paper is not fixed. When I'm doing a doodle, I tend to move it around a lot. I might rotate it, I might turn it upside down, depending on what I'm doodling and where I'm doodling it at. But I think the first thing that you should do when drawing lines, again, similar to the circles, figure out which direction feels the most comfortable to you. Is it going from top to bottom, bottom to top, left to right, or right to left? For me, top to bottom is almost always the easiest. It just feels natural. I can draw them straight. You can see here when I went from left to right or right to left, I tend to kind of not make as straight of a line. It tends to move up on either side. So there are times when I'll do a left to right, a right to left, but most of the time I'm doing a top to bottom. I don't think I ever really do a bottom to top. I just turn the paper if I need to draw in that direction. So draw some lines, try to make them parallel if you can. I like to draw like a series of 3 to 5 lines, and I like to make them close together. You'll see if you do use a broad nib on this, where it does get a little tricky, you might have some collisions, you might have lines run into each other, and it does get a little tougher with a big wet ink especially. But I like to draw just some series of lines. A few things to keep in mind: if you try to keep the tops and bottoms parallel so that your lines are the same length, this comes into play a lot in different doodles that we're going to be doing. So having everything that's pretty much, you could draw a line across here, a line across here, and it's not going to be like a curved line or something like that. Having them all the same length is really nice. I also think having consistent spacing between them, so we're not going here, 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 here. That is not going to look good in a doodle, so I try to keep my spacing fairly consistent between each line. And again, we're practicing here, so the more you do it properly in this exercise, the more it's going to help you when it's time to actually start doodling. So one other thing that you want to pay attention to here is the shading of the ink. So if you're using a high sheen ink, you might not see a lot of shading because it's so saturated, but this particular ink does have some shading to it. The bottom is darker than the top part. So when you're using a shading ink, you want to be mindful that you're consistent in the direction that you're drawing lines. One of the doodles I like to do has lines that all come together at a certain point. And if you're using a shading ink and you do this, then the middle is going to all be dark, the outer side outer parts of the lines are all going to be lighter. If I do something like this, I'm going to have inconsistent shading where some will be darker here, some will be darker here, and it's really going to look weird. I don't think that's going to give you a good looking doodle. Also, you can see, for me at least, drawing my lines going in different directions makes them look all weird and wonky. So anytime you're drawing lines, I suggest that you always go in the same direction so that when we start doing something like this and connecting them, we have consistent shading across the doodle. So it's either out to in, or it could be in to out. You could always do something like this. And again, if you didn't like drawing from, going up, just start at the top and go down. You can see I did get some smearing here because the ink wasn't quite dry. That's just something you have to be careful of when we're practicing. It doesn't really matter, but for a doodle that might, that's not too bad, but I don't want to do that very often. Now the next exercise is going to be drawing some curved lines. So we had parallel straight lines up here. The next thing we're going to do is do some parallel curved lines. I've got my broad nib here. We're going to try it and see what happens with these curved lines. So the first thing you can do is just basically start a straight line and just add some curve to it. It could be just a little elbow like this. It could be like a 90 degree angle. It could be a U shape. But again, the thing we're looking for is kind of this consistency in spacing and also parallel ends so that the top and the side are fairly flat where they start and where they stop. So these, it could be, like I say, any shape that you want as long as it has some curve to it. It could be a very gradual curve like this. It could be a very drastic curve. I don't know if that's that drastic, but it could be a very drastic curve like a U. And what we want to do is just kind of have this line here and this spacing similar. So just drawing a series of curved lines, I think is really good practice. These parallel lines are great practice as well, but these curves will really test you once you're comfortable with straight lines. And these will, a U like this is pretty tough to get it to look good, if I'm going to be honest. Mine doesn't look that great. So definitely go different directions. You can see I'm mostly going top to bottom, but I am curving in different directions. So one is curving to the right, one is going to curve to the left, and make sure you're comfortable with both of these. If I wanted, there's another smear. If I wanted to do something that's more like a smile, I am not good like this, partly because I think my nib covers up the line as I'm going, so it's really hard to track. But also it's that going from, drawing a horizontal line is much harder for me than drawing a vertical line. So if I want to do something like this, I'm just going to turn my paper and do it like this. And then I'll turn my paper back. So for me, this makes a lot more sense. It's so much easier than trying to draw from right to left. Oops, those aren't even curved. Or especially left to right. I really, really am not good at going left to right. Sorry, that's right to left. This was left to right. I'm not good at left and right either, apparently. So regardless, I prefer this to this. And that's pretty much it as far as this practice exercise goes. I really think these are the basics to the doodles that I end up doing and that I'm going to be showing you in the future. So if you practice these, it doesn't have to be daily, it doesn't have to be with any routine. What I do think, having these basics down, being able to draw circles, concentric circles, being able to comfortably fill them in, knowing that you skip the outer one and go every other one. And let me just show you the reason for that. If I draw another circle here, another set of circles, then if I were to fill this outer one and this outer one, they're going to merge. But when I leave the outer one blank, and fill in starting from the second from the outside. Then we have this really nice separation between the two circles where we can see they're two different sets and they just happen to merge and overlap. We don't get that if this part is filled in here. So it basically all gets filled in and it doesn't look nearly as good. So avoid doing that. But back to the practice, I say if you can do these circles, if you can practice filling them in, draw parallel lines, trying to keep the tops and the bottoms starting and stopping at the same point. Maybe draw some converging lines so that your shading is consistent and they're all going in the same direction. Draw some parallel curved lines, so it could be something slight curve, a little bit of a bend to it. It could be a 90 degree, it could be a U shape. But again, doing your best to keep them consistently spaced apart and ending along the same point. If you can do all of this when you're bored, when you're sitting on a conference call, when you get a new pen, some new ink that you want to try out, sitting down, running through these exercises, once or twice a week or just whenever you get a chance will really, really help you be more consistent in your doodling. Well, I hope you found that helpful and informative. These are practice exercises that you can do anytime, anywhere, as long as you have a pen and a piece of paper. And over time, the more you do them, the more consistent your doodles are going to be. And consistency, in my opinion, leads to better looking doodles. So when you've got a new pen, new ink to try out, maybe you're trying someone else's at a pen posse or pen meet, sit down, do a few of these lines, do some circles, fill in some blank spaces, and really just kind of practice these basic techniques. And in the long run, you're going to have great looking doodles. So have fun, keep doodling, like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.